Today I'm going to be recommending some books to read in winter. I think most of these books are either set in winter, or they just remind me of winter, or they're just really good books to sort of snuggle up with on a wintry day when it's really cold and it's freezing outside, or it's raining and it's just kind of miserable and grey and horrible. And these books are just really good to make you feel nice and cozy. They're the perfect books to sort of snuggle up under a blanket with a cup of tea and just feel nice and lovely and cozy and hide from the cold and the terrible weather outside. So I have a lot of books to get through today, so I'm going to start right away. So the first book I'm going to recommend is probably quite an obvious one, and it's one that ends up in a lot of sort of these wintry book recommendation videos, and that is, of course, The Bear and The Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This book is very good for winter for a lot of reasons. So it's set in medieval Russia, and it takes a lot of inspiration from Russian fairy tales and folklore. There's a lot of Russian mythological creatures mentioned in this. So the main character is a girl called Vasya, and she lives in sort of the Russian wilderness, and she's grown up on sort of these fairy tales and this folklore, and she can see the mythological creatures that other people maybe don't necessarily believe in anymore. A lot of the book is sort of looking at how folklore meets religion. So it's sort of set at the time where where Christianity was being introduced to Russia and sort of spreading to sort of the more rural areas and coming into conflict with the more pagan religions that already existed there. And so it's really interesting in terms of the conflict between Christianity and pagan religions. So I first read this book a couple of years ago, and I didn't love it initially. I then read the rest in the series. There's two more after this, it's a trilogy, and actually I prefer the other two books to the first one. I think it definitely gets better as it goes on. I think the first one definitely suffers a lot from... It's very slow to start off with. The main character is Vasya, but we also follow her brothers and her father, and also the girl that becomes her stepmother. And it follows from when Vasya is a baby to when she's an adult. So it probably takes place over 20 years or so. I'm not quite sure how old she is by the end. Maybe she's like 18 or 16 or something. But I don't know. I'm not like other girls, and I think the other characters in this are more interesting than who we get as the main character. She's very perfect and everyone loves her until things start going quite wrong. And I think the other characters in the book are more interesting than her, particularly the girl who becomes her stepmother. I found a really interesting character, and then she just gets completely ruined. Not to give mild spoilers, but she becomes very much like an evil stepmother figure, and you do kind of understand where she's coming from, but it definitely improves. Like the other two books are very much, I think, more nuanced, and they do look more closely at sort of the themes that are introduced in this one in terms of religion, but definitely would recommend reading in winter just for the vibes. It's very much set in winter. You get the snow, you get the chill, you get the cold, you get sort of monsters outside, and feels quite chilling at times. It gets quite spooky. But yeah, it is a really fun read just to put you in the mood. So that is The Bear and the Nightingale. So next on the list is also going with the kind of obvious choices, but this is one of my favourite books of all time, so it has to go on this list, and that is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This book is amazing. But to tell you a bit more about it, it's a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. It's set in, again, I think it's either Russia or Ukraine. What's now Ukraine? I think. It's sort of Eastern Europe. We follow a couple of characters. The two main ones, so we have Miriam, who starts us off, and she is a moneylender's daughter. So her family is Jewish. So they're the only Jewish people in their village, and they live on the edge of town. Everyone takes advantage of them. Her father isn't a very good moneylender, so Miriam basically takes it upon herself to run the family business, and she's great at it. She is amazing. I love her so much. And she starts building a fortune for herself, and so she draws the attention of, is it the Starek? Is that what they're called? Yes. Starrick, I think, which is sort of this fairy creatures or people. And she draws the attention of their king, who basically makes a deal with her. It's not a fair deal, but he says that she must turn his silver into gold, and in return he'll make her his wife. And she has no choice, because if she doesn't do this, she'll die, most likely. And the Starrick come and they murder people, and it's all quite spooky and scary. And so she's got to try and turn his silver into gold. And meanwhile, our other main character is Irina, and she is the daughter of the Duke that owns the local area where Miriam's village is. And so Miriam goes to the city where the Duke lives, where Irina is. And so their stories sort of intertwine. But Irina ends up having this Starrick silver jewellery that makes her beautiful. I don't want to give too much away, but basically you have these two characters, Miriam and Irina, and their lives intertwine, and they both have these sort of monstrous kings interested in marrying them, and they both have to figure out how to survive, and they end up sort of working together to try and stay alive. But it's such a good book. It's so interesting. It's so good for the wintry vibes, but again with like religion and looking at superstition and hatred towards certain communities. And it is really good, and I highly recommend, not even just for winter, any time of year, but particularly as it gets colder. Spinning Silver is really good for getting you into that wintry mood. So next we're starting to veer off into slightly more unusual recommendations, but this one is a smaller book, so it's only, let's see, it's 92 pages, and they're not very long pages because the writing's very big. It's sort of a children's book, but it's Clockwork by Philip Pullman. Now this is, again, it's set in winter. It's got a lot of wintry vibes. It's cold. It's set in a village. I think it's sort of in Germany, I guess. I don't think that it's very clear, but everyone's got sort of German names, and it's so good. So it starts off in, I think it's an inn, and it's all about, it's basically about clockwork. It is set in Germany, a little German town, and all the people gather in this tavern and they start telling stories, and the old clockwork maker turns up and he starts telling a story about clockwork and princes, and it sort of all goes on from there. And I'm not going to give too much away because there's not much of it. So as soon as you start telling what it's about, you sort of end up talking about half the book. But would strongly recommend if you like anything to do with anything quick, to be honest. Anything that's sort of like creepy German winter. It does feel like a fairy tale. It does feel very much like you're reading a very real fairy tale like story. And it's like, I don't know, it's just like winter. And it's just really cute as well. It is very emotional. But yeah, if you are interested in sort of stories, winter and clockwork, highly recommend Clockwork by Philip Pullman. So next we have a graphic novel. So this is Tinder by Sally Gardner. Again, we're going with a strong fairy tale theme. So this is actually a retelling of a fairy tale called, I think it's called The Tinder Box. I think it was one of the stories that the Brothers Grimm published in their sort of collection of fairy tales. And I don't want to give too much away. If you've heard the story of the Tinderbox, then you will kind of know where this is going. But I think it's a young soldier basically makes a deal, and it involves a tinderbox, and it just sort of unravels from there. And it's a fairy tale. It's beautifully illustrated. It's very wintry. It's a little bit creepy. Yeah, it's just perfect if you want something a little bit creepy just to take you through winter nights. And it's very much like a dark fairy tale. And so if you're interested in more of a graphic novel kind of thing, and again, you could probably read this in like a day or so. It's not, because there's pictures, it goes quite quickly. Actually, is it a graphic novel? It's a novel with pictures. It's an illustrated book. But yeah, I mean, by the cover, you're like, it's creepy, it's dark, it's winter. So that is Tinder by Sally Gardner. Next, okay, I need to like start speeding through these because we're going to be here for like an hour. So next we have Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. Now this is not going to take you a day. We're going from the brief, quick little reads to she is chunky, she is thick, she's gonna take you the entire winter to get through. How many pages? It's like 900 and something. I don't think it quite gets to 1,000. Let's see. Oh no, it does. It's 1,006 pages. It is chunky. But yes, this is also a TV series on BBC. I don't know if it's still on iPlayer or if you can still find it anywhere, but the series is really good and it's very faithful to the book. So if you don't want to read 1,006 pages, the series basically tells you the same story. But if you do want something big to take you through all of winter, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So this is set during the Regency era, so during the Napoleonic Wars? Is that how you say it? I don't know. So yeah, 1806. So if you've gone to see Napoleon, you could read this afterwards. This is sort of set in winter, but it's less the setting of winter, but more like the vibes of winter. But it's set in 1806 and it's sort of alternative history. So there used to be magic and magicians, but now magicians are more likely to study the theory of magic rather than actively practice it, until there come two real magicians, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Again, I don't want to tell too much about it, but it's great. It's historical, but it's also fantasy. There's this huge cast of characters. It's romantic in a way. It's creepy in a way. It's all about, there's like superstition, there's a fairy, and it ends up being quite chaotic, but it is great fun. So if you want something big and chunky, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Right, whew. I should have made myself a cup of tea, but I was like, I don't need a cup of tea to get through this. And now I'm like, I think I should have made myself a cup of tea to get through this. So the next one is Wintersong. Who's this by? By S.J. Jones. This, again, I do love this book. I would say this book is not for the weak-hearted. It's not that long. The writing, I think, takes a while to get used to. It's very lyrical. It's very purple prose. I don't know, the writing, it's musical, and I think the writing suits the theme of the book because it's about music. So our main character is Liesel and she's a composer. I think she plays the piano, but her family are quite poor. They run this town's inn, and so she has to look after her brother and her sister. I think are her parents alive? I'm not sure, but I think her aunt is there, or her father might have died. I'm not sure. But we don't stay with her family for much of it because it's actually a retelling of the film Labyrinth, the one with David Bowie. So it's basically about the Goblin King that lives underground in the woods, and he takes her sister, and obviously Liesel has to go and try and rescue her sister from the Goblin King, and it sort of all develops from there. It's really sweet. It's a romance, sort of. It's as much of a romance as I would say the Labyrinth film is, where it's sort of this dark, twisted love story set underground in winter. The writing is just so beautiful. I think the description of music is excellent. Again, it's a very slow book. It takes its time, but I think it's definitely worth it. There is a sequel, which is called Shadow Song. I like the sequel less. I think it works as a standalone. You finish it and you're like, and I think you do feel like you don't necessarily need a sequel, but a sequel does exist. Wintersong, it's so good for winter, for being, again, like this creepy, dark, but still romantic story. And there's also this, and you do get to see a few different perspectives, and it's just really interesting in terms of mental health and how we perceive mental health and how it feels to have bad mental health personally. I think there's like the author's note is also really interesting, so don't miss when you finish the book reading the author's note at the end. But it's just so sweet and wholesome in a dark, twisted way. I don't know how many times I said dark and twisted, but I think that definitely describes this book, is lyrical, dark and twisted. So that is Wintersong. Okay, so we've got one book left, and this is actually a collection of short stories. I do have two options that I was sort of debating between for this slot, but I've gone with Tangleweed and Brine by Deidre Sullivan. I think that's how you say it. And this actually won the Irish Book Award 2017. I heard of this book from BuzzFeed. I think they had an article on it where they published one of the short stories in here, and I read it and was just like, I have to read the whole thing. And so I did. And it's just, again, it's fairy tales. It's really interesting because it digs into sort of the mindset of some of the different characters in fairy tales. So you have sort of perspectives from a lot of the witches in different fairy tales. It's very feminist. It's very much looking at these sort of typically quite stereotypical characters and caricatures and giving them sort of a voice and a reasoning and sort of taking you through why they made the decisions that they made in the fairy tale or why they're perceived that way. And it is just really, again, it's lyrical. The writing is beautiful and haunting. All the stories are very different. It reads a lot like poetry in a way. I think I call it short stories, but I think they could also be poems or sort of prose poetry. It very much blurs the line between what is prose and what is poetry. The word choices in here are just amazing. So yeah, a strong recommend. Again, for like any time of year, but I think particularly in winter, it's the time to sort of hunker down with some fairy tales and sort of some different perspectives on fairy tales. Creepy, dark fairy tales for winter. So that is Tangleweed and Brine. So that brings us to the end of this video and all of my wintry book recommendations. Do let me know if you're going to read any of these or if you have already read any of what I've suggested and what you either think or thought of them. I am actually probably going to read Spinning Silver again this winter, just because I think I read it every couple of months because it is one of my favourite books of all time. So I hope you enjoy whatever you're reading this winter. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you again next week with another video.